Blanche Lamont was 20 years old. She had come down from Hecla, Montana the autumn before to live with her aunt Mrs. Noble on 21st Street in San Francisco and finish school. She was studying at Boys High and taking classes at the normal school on Powell Street. On the afternoon of April 3rd, 1895, she walked to her cooking class as she did every week. She would ride home on the Powell Street cable car with a young man she knew from church. She would never be seen alive again. The young man was Theodore Durrant. He was 23, a medical student at Cooper Medical College, and an assistant at the Sunday School of Emmanuel Baptist Church. He lived with his parents. He was known to the Noble household. He was thought of, in the language of the time, as a promising young man. They boarded the cable car together a little after 2. Several of Blanche's classmates saw them. 3 other passengers, Edwards, Lanigan, and Pleasant, would later tell the same story, each from their own seat. Durant was carrying gloves. Witnesses noticed that he tapped Blanche lightly on the arm with them as they rode. They got off near 21st Street and walked east toward Emmanuel Baptist Church on Bartlett Street. The building was large, made of stone, with a bell tower that could be seen from a block away. It sat between 22nd and 23rd Streets in the Mission District, surrounded by the small wooden houses of working families. Across the street, at 124 Bartlett, lived a woman named Caroline Leake. She was at her window that afternoon. She saw a young couple approach the side entrance of the church. She saw the man open the side gate. She saw him let the young woman inside. She marked the time by her own clock. It was 17 minutes past 4. Mrs. Leake would repeat that time, 4:17, many months later, from the witness stand. It was the last time anyone but Theodore Durant would see Blanche Lamont alive. That evening, there was a prayer meeting at Emmanuel Baptist Church. It was Wednesday, and Wednesday meetings were part of the ordinary rhythm of the congregation. People arrived after supper. Children sat with their parents. The meeting went on for about an hour, and afterward, neighbors spoke on the sidewalk in front of the church before walking home. Mrs. Noble was there. Her niece was not. She had expected Blanche after cooking class, and Blanche had not come home for supper, and now the meeting was ending, and still there was no sign of her. Mrs. Noble was standing near the door when Theodore Durant came up to her. He asked, in a casual way, whether Blanche was there. Mrs. Noble said no. She had not seen her since morning. Durant said he had not seen her either. He suggested pleasantly that perhaps Blanche had gone to visit a friend. He did not seem troubled. He did not seem in any particular hurry. He said good evening and left. Later that night, he came to the house on 21st Street. The uncle answered the door. Mrs. Noble came out. Maud Lamont, Blanche's younger sister, came out too. Durant was holding a book. It was a copy of The Newcomes by Thackeray. He said he had promised to lend it to Blanche. He wanted to drop it off. He asked again if she was home yet. She was not. He handed the book to Mrs. Noble. He asked her to pass it along when Blanche came in. He stood in the doorway a moment longer, and then he left, and Mrs. Noble closed the door and placed the book on a table in the front hall. Blanche's bed was empty that night. It was empty in the morning. The book remained on the table. The next day, Mrs. Noble went to the police. She filed a missing persons report. Nothing was found. A young woman of good character, from a good family, did not usually disappear in San Francisco in 1895 without someone knowing where she had gone. The police were polite. The police took the report. For days afterward, nothing happened at all. There are 10 days between Blanche Lamont walking into Emmanuel Baptist Church and the morning anyone understood that she had never walked out. During those 10 days, Theodore Durant came to the Noble house more than once. He came to ask if there was news. He came to suggest things. He said, on one of those visits, that Blanche might have been taken to the Barbary Coast. He said it was possible she had been seduced there. He said, later, that perhaps she had gone willingly, that perhaps she had grown tired of the religious life her aunt had built around her, that perhaps she had chosen to disappear into the part of the city where young women of good character did not ordinarily go. Mrs. Noble did not believe any of it. She said so later. She said the theories did not match the Blanche she knew. Blanche did not read dance programs. Blanche did not have friends on Commercial Street. Blanche had come to San Francisco from a small town in Montana to finish school and to live in her aunt's house on 21st Street, and that was all. But Mrs. Noble did not have anything to offer in return. She had no theory of her own. A well-dressed young man from her own church was offering her a version of what had happened, and she had nothing to set beside it except her certainty that it was wrong. She let him into the house each time. She did not have a reason not to. He was a member of the congregation. He was a medical student. He had been trusted with the keys to the Sunday school. He had last seen Blanche on the cable car, by his own account, and had walked her only as far as the corner. During those same 10 days, services continued at Emmanuel Baptist Church. The choir practiced on Thursday evenings under the direction of George King, the organist, who was one of Durant's closest friends. The Easter holiday was approaching, and plans were being made to decorate the sanctuary with lilies. The women of the congregation gathered in the library to sort programs. Above them, at the top of a narrow wooden staircase, behind a door that was usually locked, was a small room. It was cold. The air did not move in it. Inside the room, laid on her back, with her head resting on a wooden block and her hands folded across her chest, was Blanche Lamont. She had been there since the afternoon of April 3rd. None of this was known. None of it would be known for another 10 days. And Theodore Durant kept coming to the house on 21st Street, and Mrs. Noble kept opening the door. Her name was Minnie Williams. She was 21 years old. Her parents had divorced when she was a child. It was an unusual circumstance at the time. She had found work where she could. By the spring of 1895, she was employed as a domestic servant in the household of C.H. Morgan, across the bay in Alameda. She had decided that spring to make a change. She had already shipped her trunk to a woman named Mrs. Amelia Voy, who lived at 1707 Howard Street in San Francisco, in anticipation of moving. She was, in other words, a young woman mid-arrangement, halfway between one place and the next. She was known at Emmanuel Baptist Church. She had been briefly involved with Theodore Durant some time earlier. Friends of hers later said that, at a church picnic, in a spot somewhat apart from the others, he had made what they described, in the careful language of the time, improper advances. The relationship had ended. By the spring of 1895, he was keeping company with Blanche Lamont. On the evening of Friday, April 12, 1895, Minnie Williams left her boarding house in the direction of a church gathering at the home of Dr. T.A. Vogel, a dentist and a church elder. The gathering was a pleasant midweek meeting of young people. She was expected there. She did not arrive. Around 8 o'clock that evening, she was seen outside Emmanuel Baptist Church. A sidewalk witness named Hodgkins was passing by. He saw a young couple in a heated argument just outside the church doors. The argument was loud enough that he approached. He would tell the court, later, that the man's manner was not becoming to a gentleman. The young woman, he said, seemed distressed. The man he identified as Durant. The young woman he did not know by name, but he described her, and the description matched Minnie Williams. A short time later, a neighbor named Charles Hill, who lived at 203.5 Bartlett Street, saw a young woman who resembled Williams entering the church with a man who resembled Durant. It was the last time Minnie Williams was seen alive. The next morning was Holy Saturday. At Emmanuel Baptist Church, the women of the congregation came to decorate the sanctuary for Easter Sunday. 3 of them, Mrs. Nolt, Minnie Lord, and Katie Stevens, went into the church library to sort materials. A door on one side of the library opened onto a small closet. One of the women reached for it. Inside the closet was the body of Minnie Williams. She had been there by the reconstruction of events since the night before. She was partially dressed. She had been stabbed. A broken knife blade was later recovered at the scene. The medical examination that followed recorded further injuries and, in the language of the time, indicated that she had been criminally assaulted. The women who opened the closet ran out of the building. Word was sent to the police. Captain Isaiah W. Lees, the head of the San Francisco Detective Bureau, had been in Los Angeles on unrelated business. He returned at once. In the meantime, his detectives, John Seymour, Ed Gibson, and A. Anthony, began the search of the church. They moved methodically. The building was large. The library was searched. The sanctuary was searched. The basement was searched. Then they went upstairs. A narrow staircase led from the second floor up into the bell tower. The door at the top was closed. Above the door was a small, cold room that held the bell and its machinery. It was not a room anyone entered often. It was not a room the congregation thought about. The detectives opened the door and went in. Blanch Lamont was lying on her back. She had been undressed. Her clothes and the school books she had been carrying on April 3rd were concealed within the structure of the building nearby. There were signs that her body had been moved to the upper level. Her hands had been placed upon her chest. A piece of wood had been set beneath her head. She had been there for 10 days. When the body was carried down into the warmer part of the building, the cold of the belfry began to leave it, and its appearance changed. One of the detectives said that up until that moment, she had looked as if she were sleeping. 2 young women killed in the same church, 9 days apart, both discovered within hours of each other by people who had come to arrange flowers. The afternoon the bodies were found, a package arrived in the mail at the Noble house. It was a small parcel, wrapped in a folded sheet of newspaper. Mrs. Noble did not open it at once. Word had come from the church, and the household on 21st Street was occupied with the kind of rapid, disorienting event that does not leave room for the afternoon mail. It was later, in the evening, that the parcel was opened. Inside were 3 rings. They had belonged to Blanche Lamont. One of them was a small diamond ring that Maud, her sister, had given her. Maud identified it at once. The others were also hers. They had been, as far as the family knew, on her hands when she walked out of the house on April 3rd. The wrapping, according to what was later said at trial, bore a name written on the outside. The name was not Mrs. Noble's. It was George King. George King was the organist at Emmanuel Baptist Church. He was the man who had led the Thursday choir practices during the 10 days Blanche had been in the belfry. He was also, by the account of everyone who knew both of them, a close friend of Theodore Durrant. He had been the one who testified, on the afternoon of April 3rd, that Durant had come down from the direction of the bell tower around 5 o'clock, pale, without his jacket, asking for a drugstore. The package raised a question that the prosecution would return to again and again. If Durant was the sender, why had he written his friend's name on the outside? The likeliest answer, in the view of the state, was that the package was meant to be intercepted and investigated, and that when it was, the suspicion would fall on George King. Mrs. Noble had the rings in her hand that evening. She had, within the space of a few hours, received the news of where her niece had been found, and the small possessions her niece had last been seen wearing, delivered separately, in the same afternoon. One arrived as word. The other arrived in the mail. Sometime between the 4th of April and the 10th, Theodore Durrant walked into a pawn shop at 405 DuPont Street and tried to pledge a ring. The pawnbroker was a man named Adolf Oppenheimer. He was accustomed to strangers coming into his shop with objects they were not particularly attached to. What struck him about this customer, though, he could not at first say. There was nothing openly wrong. The young man was well dressed. He was polite, but he did not quite behave like someone who owned the ring he was pledging. The transaction was not completed. The young man left. Months later, when photographs of Theodore Durant began to appear in the press, Adolf Oppenheimer recognized him. He identified him to the police. He identified him on the witness stand. He told the court that the ring the young man had tried to pledge was, as far as he could tell, a ring that belonged to a woman. The significance of Oppenheimer's story was not in what happened. Nothing happened. No ring was sold. No money changed hands. The significance was in the timing. Between the 4th and the 10th of April, Durant was also visiting the Noble House to ask after Blanch. He was also joining the search parties. He was also, during the same stretch of days, carrying with him the rings that he would eventually mail in a folded newspaper to the Noble address. He had tried to sell the rings first. Only when the first attempt had failed did he send them in the post. The trial began on July 22, 1895. The selection of a jury took more than a month. More than 1,000 prospective jurors were considered before 12 were seated. Judge Murphy presided. The district attorney, William Barnes, led the prosecution. The defense was conducted by General John Dickinson and Eugene Dupree. The state called more than 50 witnesses. Among them was Maud Lamont. She took the stand on a September morning. The defense had tried to argue that the body in the belfry was too heavy to have been Blanch, that Blanch had weighed 140 pounds. Maud Lamont said quietly that her sister had weighed closer to 122. She identified the diamond ring she had given her. She spoke, in the measured way that people speak under oath, of the young woman her sister had been before the afternoon of April 3rd. Mrs. Caroline Leake was also called. She gave her account of the side gate of the church, and the young man opening it, and the young woman going in. She said the time, 4:17. She had looked at her clock. Theodore Durrant chose to testify in his own defense. It was an unusual choice. Over several days, he offered his version of April 3rd, and then a revised version, and then another. Details shifted. Times shifted. When prosecutors read his earlier statements back to him, he said he had been misquoted. He suggested alternative killers. He suggested, as the weeks went on, that his own pastor, the Reverend J. George Gibson, was the man who had actually been with Blanch in the church that afternoon. It was the same method he had used with Mrs. Noble 10 months earlier. The content had changed. The arrangement of the sentences was the same. The jury received the case on the 24th of September. They withdrew to deliberate. 5 minutes later, they had reached a verdict. It is reported that several of the jurors felt that 5 minutes was too short a time to return with a guilty verdict in a capital case, so they finished their cigars. Then they went back in. The family of Theodore Durant did not accept the verdict. For 20 months, from the autumn of 1895 through the first week of January 1898, his parents fought to keep him alive. His mother was Isabella Hutchinson Durant. His father was William Durant, a shoemaker. They lived quietly, by ordinary measures, in San Francisco. They attended the trial every day. Newspaper reporters in the courtroom studied Isabella Durant closely and wrote about her. They described her as composed. They described her, in the idiom of the period, as proud. She did not weep in the courtroom. She did not faint. When the verdict came in, she kept attending hearings. She kept talking to attorneys. Every legal avenue the defense could identify was attempted. Appeals were filed with the California Supreme Court. When those failed, petitions were sent to the governor. When the governor refused, the defense moved to the federal courts. The execution was postponed twice, each time with only 2 days to spare. On the 1st of June, 1897, Governor James Budd issued a written decision declining to intervene in the case. On the 6th of January, 1898, the final motions were made before the United States Circuit Court and were refused. Somewhere in the middle of those 20 months, Isabella and William Durant made an unusual decision. They hired a kinetoscope operator. The kinetoscope was then a new device. They arranged for the cameraman to go to San Quentin State Prison and to film their son walking in the prison garden. They intended, apparently, to use the film in some future petition or simply to have it as a record. The reels are no longer known to exist. The fact that they were made is among the earliest documented uses of a motion camera in an American legal campaign. It was perhaps the first time in the country that a condemned man's image, in living motion, had been produced as an object of persuasion. The persuasion did not work. On the morning of January 7, 1898, Theodore Durant was hanged at San Quentin. The warden, J.W. Hale, read the death warrant. Durant, according to those present, said he would waive his right to hear the warrant read in full, to spare the warden what he called an unpleasant duty. He made a short statement about his innocence. He was then hanged. After the hanging, his parents claimed the body. They wanted it cremated, as was becoming common in certain circles of San Francisco in that decade. They approached the crematoriums of the city. Every one of them refused. No record survives of any single crematorium offering a published reason. The refusal was collective. It did not need a written policy. A man whose face had been on the front page of every newspaper in the city for 2.5 years, whose trial had been staged as a play at the Alcazar Theater, whose sister had gone to Europe, whose rings had arrived in the mail of a grieving aunt, was not to be reduced to ashes inside the city limits. On the 13th of January, the body of Theodore Durant was placed on a train and sent to Los Angeles. A crematorium there accepted it. Blanch Lamont's body was taken home to Montana. She was buried with her family. She had been in San Francisco for about 18 months. A photograph of her survives from October of 1893. She is standing outside a one-room schoolhouse in Hecla, with her students gathered around her. She is 20 years old, or close to it. She is a schoolteacher in a mining town. She is smiling slightly at the camera. It is autumn. The photograph is held today in the collection of the Library of Congress. It was taken 18 months before the afternoon of the Powell Street cable car. Minnie Williams was buried in San Francisco. The city later closed its cemeteries. The graves were moved south to a town called Colma, where by law most of the dead of San Francisco now reside. The move was not arranged for individual families of limited means. Minnie Williams was moved as part of a mass reburial into an unmarked common grave. Her bones are there now. The grave has no stone. There is no surviving photograph of her parents. There is no letter from her in any archive that has been found. There is no obituary in any paper of the period. No surviving relative appears to have spoken at any grave. It is not known who grieved for her, or for how long, or how they marked it. The public record that survived, and that named her for a century, was written by the men who investigated her death and the men who wrote about it in the newspapers. The people who had known her in life did not leave an account. Of Mrs. Noble, who had opened her door each evening to Theodore Durant during the 10 days of April of 1895, the record says almost nothing after the trial. She is not known to have given an interview. She is not known to have written a memoir. What the rest of her life was like is not recorded. Maud Lamont, the younger sister, is not known beyond her time on the witness stand. The photograph in the Library of Congress remains. A young woman and her students outside a schoolhouse in Montana in the autumn of 1893. It is the last known photograph of Blanche Lamont.